A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 31, the Force Awakens review show. Finally, I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my globe-trotting co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
Happy end of 2015.
Happy end of 2015.
How are things? It's been a while since we've
Things are
spoken.
Good. It has been a while. Yeah, I spent Christmas outside the borders of the United States, and that was nice, and then came back and saw a movie.
So, how many times have you seen it?
Twice.
I
was going to make it 3, but life intervened, and I haven't had a chance to see it a third time yet.
Yeah, it feels like, the movie has now officially been out for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
14 days. So any chance, because of, life commitments and stuff, any chance for us to do a hot take of this film after all this time has dwindled?
But we knew that.
Well, we knew that. We
wanted to give a more measured response.
Yes. And even in that realm, we have not, in that interim, we haven't really discussed our feelings about this film that we've seen. We have I've picked up some cursory comments on Twitter from you and whatnot, so I can kind of maybe gather an idea. But this will be the first time you'll be hearing it live or live on tape or whatever it is. Speaking of live on tape, I hope you guys enjoy our slightly adjusted theme song.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, speaking of live on tape, and then start talking about the Larry Sanders Show for some reason.
Live on tape. You see that sign up there that says applesauce? No, I just I did a little adjustment. I removed Darth Vader.
You have it right. We have a new villain.
We have a new villain and this new regime, and I truncated it, removing the 20th Century Fox logo, as we are in the new we are in the new regime, the new as George Lucas would say, the white slavers that now own Star Wars, which if we have time we'll get to that interview. But generally I think our goal today is to discuss the film, I guess.
Yeah. The way, so as Robert alluded to, he and I really have not talked about this together. We wanted to go in fresh. We wanted to give our surface responses, what's right at the top of our minds and in our hearts, talking to each other. So I guess if you want to get into it,
well,
away.
Just really quickly, for some reason this is curious to me. What was the circumstances? I mean, we all know because you were out of the country and you didn't want to run the risk of being in some place in Belgium and seeing a dubbed version of this movie. Because after I saw the movie, I just, for shits and giggles, I looked up, is it playing in Brussels or whatever? And it is. But someone told me that some countries they dub it, some they subtitle, and I knew you wanted to have it not interfere with your trip, so you went later.
Yeah, I mean, we were visiting family, and it's kind of it's hard to tell, an 89-year-old woman, like, oh, by the way, we're going to go see Star Wars, so we'll just see you later. It's...
Exactly. But I am kind of
an
curious...
An 89-year-old Belgian woman, I should say.
Yeah. When you got back, and what was it? Where did you see it? What theater?
Okay. Well, so I'll start off by saying, like, I basically had to black myself out from the internet. I had to go completely off the grid in Belgium because we had internet access, and I used it a little bit to do other things. But I mean, Facebook, Twitter, even Google News had headlines that were contain spoilers or potential spoilers, or just mentioned things about the movie that I didn't want to know going in. So I basically couldn't look at any of that stuff. So we got back on the 26th, the evening of the 26th. And then on the 27th, I have not seen this movie in IMAX or 3D or anything. We just saw it at, is it an AMC? What is it? Just a normal theater.
AMC is the company, I think.
Yeah, we just saw it at a normal theater.
I just know that you guys since you're in Austin, you guys have the Alamo Draft House. But
right, so that was the first time I saw it.
Okay.
And we were close-ish to the screen, not the row of seats that's like on the floor right in front of the screen. We were in the tiered stadium seating, but we were a third of the way up and over towards the right-hand side. The second time I wanted to see it, so then I'll say, the next day, the inside door handle of my car, of the driver's side of the car, broke.
Ugh.
Which, I mean, you can still get out of the car either by climbing over to the passenger side or rolling down the window and opening it from the outside. But it's not like the most convenient way to drive around. And I had a bunch of errands I had to run and all that kind of stuff. So I did that. And then the day after that, I went to one of the Alamo Draft houses here in town. And I got there, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes before showtime, but it was like, I don't know, 11:10 a.m. So I was like, no, I don't think it'll be that crowded. It was 11:10 a.m. on, December 28th, like more than a week after the film had premiered. So I figured I'd be all right. They had one seat left, and it was essentially in the first row, 10 feet from the screen. So I said, no, thanks. I left. And then I ended up, I think the next day is when I ended up, seeing it for the second time. And that was, again, just at a regular AMC theater. This time it was at like 10:30 in the morning, at the mall. And that time I was maybe the third row from the back, but right smack dab in the middle. And so I think that makes for a slightly different experience. So that's the logistics of how I saw the movie.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of like I think I said before. I had bought tickets I tried to get tickets to like a preferred theater, like this really nice high end theater, but it was impossible. Mm-hmm. So I made the compromise. I got one at the mall, not far from my house, and then I found out that there's a small independent theater, actually in the part of Seattle I live in, that was going to be showing it a day early. So what I had done, and they're not very good at advertising, so they had still had 40 tickets when I got my ticket, and I had actually hemmed and hawed for a whole 24 hours, if that's any indication of how bad their advertising is. So when I got there, I had a lot of anxiety about it because, one, I have anxiety about movie theaters because I hate people talking.
Yeah.
That theater in particular is very run down. I know, although they did switch over to digital projection. I had been there a year previous with a showing of Interstellar because Christopher Nolan, he struck so many 35 millimeter prints, and he said, if you have a conventional screen, you can see it 4 days early. So I went, and the seats were terrible and no padding, and I bruised my tailbone, and it hurt for 3 weeks. And I couldn't, like, every time I sat down, I was, like, getting kicked, and I was like, this might happen again. But am I willing to risk that to see Star Wars a day earlier? And I was in the same boat as you were, but really to not the same extent, because you had to deal with this longer. But I was kind of, you know, I have that thing where the phone, it's like you kind of flip through it as a matter of habit, and it's a bad habit, and especially if you're trying to avoid spoilers. And it would be like, even like CNN, you try to check the what's going on, and you'd scroll down, all of a sudden you'd see a stormtrooper helmet, and it would say, you know, the magic is back, and I'm just like, boom, I'm like, I can't look at this. I can't, you know, having to stay off of Twitter, or having to, you know, turn off all your notifications, because even that would happen. There'd be a situation if so many people, you know, we have a show Twitter, and we follow a lot of Star Wars related people, so when they will trend your experience towards Star Wars. So if a lot of people are tweeting about something, they might think, Twitter might go, hey, maybe we should let the Talking Bird account know that, you know, the 15 people you follow have all tweeted about X. And I'm just like, you know, every time my phone buzzed, I was like, oh geez. But I had to stand in the rain, and they filed us into this theater, and ironically, it was the same theater that when I was a child I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark in, so there was a nice continuity there. I was very aware at like who was sitting next to me, because basically it was like every kid between the age of 7 and 12 seemed to like want to sit within 5 feet of where we were sitting, which was kind of towards the back in the center. And there, you know, this place is old, no stadium seating. They'd actually had some padded seats this time, but it was like very much like, oh, I think I got. Now my wife had picked out the seat in front of us was broken and covered with a garbage bag, and somebody had stuck their gum to it. So we were like, nobody's going to sit in front of us at least. And luckily this lady sat next to us, and she was very concerned about this group of children talking, and she kept talking about it to the point where it seemed like she kind of was like, well, if there's going to be an issue, she's going to tell them to shut up, and I don't even have to worry about it. So to jump ahead a little bit, I had heard, the only thing I had heard is that there's going to be a half an hour of trailers, because who wouldn't want their trailer attached to a Star Wars film?
Right.
I think they showed 2 at this place.
Oh, I got like 7 trailers.
And they were short trailers, because in the next screen next door, they were showing the Amy Poehler, Tina Fey movie Sisters at the exact same time, kind of doing some counter programming. So there was just an ad for that, and I think there was one other ad, and then that Lucasfilm thing popped up, and it was like weird, like weird shivers. And of course, I'm like at this thing where it's like, well, it could be good, it could be bad, but right at this moment, it is what it is. And I mean, and I'm not going to get in my review yet until we figure out how are we going to structure this.
Well, I thought we could structure it as a series. I'll pose a series of questions as kind of jumping off points. You know, normally when there's like stuff in the news, they're like, so this happened, what do you think about that? But I thought I would structure it more with some more focused questions that I would pose to you and see what you have to say, and then we'll go from there. But I will say, just in regards to your last point about sort of how you saw the movie, your mental sort of approach. The first time I watched it, I was very analytical the whole time, thinking like, all right, do I like this? Is this good? Are there problems here? Like what? Like I was trying to take everything in at like the micro level, where it's like, all right, what does the lighting look like? What does this look like? You know, is the dialogue funny? Is the acting good? Do the sets look good? Is this done well? Is that done well or not? The second time I watched it, I would say that first time it wasn't so much about having expectations. It was about, right. I didn't have expectations for whether it would be good or not. Although by that point I had heard that it was pretty good. But I think it was more about just sort of evaluation, or okay, what do I think of this movie, and if I'm gonna like it, why do I like it, or why am I not gonna like it? Whereas the second time, having already seen it, and again, sort of the theater was much emptier. I was kind of sitting by myself, and I could just kind of I was in the middle of the row. I could kind of take everything in pretty easily. It was much more just letting the movie kind of flow, and just sort of taking it all in from a higher level, more macro perspective. So having said that, series of questions.
Okay.
And I guess you alluded to Lucas's comments. This may come up in the course of this discussion, but
yeah.
A lot of the questions I have, or some of the questions I have at least, are based on a lot of the talk and what's being written in the dialogue that's happening on, I guess, the Star Wars internet. People who are writing all of these different things about the movie. So the first question I'll pose to you, I'll pose it this way. Is Episode 7 just a rehash of Episode 4?
No, it's not. And it's I understand that a lot of people are like, that was their first blush response of that.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of similarities. It's not like I'm sitting here going like, oh, I don't understand where people are coming up with this idea. I mean, it definitely is, right down to the environments that the characters on, and some of the timing of the
right, and the shot of Finn standing, his jacket on the cliff above the town. Yeah,
I mean, it's not a rehash in the sense that they're not reproducing the same ideas and trying to elicit the same response. I honestly feel like they're using a structure with new ingredients to elicit a similar response with a definite idea that there is a future for this, and that not, there's actually more of a sense of mystery in this movie than, say, definitely than A New Hope. I should say this since I feel like we're kind of going around the question. I will say that, one, I enjoyed the film very much. That goes without. I think you can kind of gather, because we're still doing this, and I haven't been on Twitter.
Yeah, maybe we should have started saying by just clarifying. I think we both liked the movie, right?
I think so.
I liked it.
I saw it 3 times. The first 2 times in a conventional, not conventional, in a 2D thing, and the third one in 3D IMAX. I will say that, unfortunately, technology and the people next to me made the third experience not as engrossing as the first 2, and I really can't wait to get out there and see it a 4th time. I'm not saying that all of a sudden the movie was bad or anything. It was just there was distractions, and the excitement of having seen a movie 3 times in 4 days. It wasn't enough to kind of erase the fact that there was a woman talking in full voice during the 3rd time.
Yeah.
And I had to ask her to be quiet, and she kept talking. But I guess the long and the short of what your question of my feelings is that I totally understand what people are saying, but I don't think it's as simple as that. That they're like, oh, how do you what's the formula for a great Star Wars movie? Oh, just copy that and you'll have a great Star Wars movie. There's so much more to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were some chances maybe taken in this, not in filmmaking, but there was no, he didn't reinvent the wheel on this kind of thing, but I feel that he took some chances with a Star Wars movie that he had to take.
Yeah.
But he also kept his one foot firmly in the past, because I think J.J. Abrams had an idea, or Lucasfilm in general had an idea. If they came and, people have been waiting for this. I'm discounting the prequels in as far as this anticipation, because there are some people who have been waiting for this to see this story continued for 32 years.
Yeah,
and I think somehow using those earmarks of the earlier time was the best way to tell this story. But no, I don't think it was a remake.
Yeah. So I maybe wouldn't go quite as strong as you. I would say not quite. My read on it is that basically if you took A New Hope, Empire, and Jedi, Return of the Jedi, and kind of threw them in a blender, you would get something pretty close to Episode 7. But, I definitely, as we said, some of the story beats, some of the visuals and the images are, right out of Episode 4. And the other thing I would, I guess where I would go from here is what you said about J.J. Abrams taking some chances with the Star Wars movie, because and this gets back to the Lucas interview, right? Where the interview he did with Charlie Rose, where he said, they took my ideas, they said, no, thank you. We're going to go and make a movie for the fans, right? We're going to go make a retro movie. And Abrams, and that larger critique, I think, is pretty correct. Now, when he goes on to say, like, well, when I make them, I always tried to put new spaceships and new planets, and they didn't do that. That, I think, is less correct. Because, when you think of the prequels, yeah, he had new ships, right? There's like the Naboo Starfighter, which is very recognizable from the Phantom Menace, and there are some other designs in there that I think are very memorable. There are lots of new designs all over the place, and new ships and planets and things. Certainly, the new planets that was definitely like, okay, I'm going to show you stuff that you haven't seen before in Star Wars. A sinkhole planet, or the ocean planet, or things like that. But Phantom Menace, he went back to Tatooine.
He went back there 3 times. He went back there in every single one of those prequels.
Yeah. And as the prequels went on, okay, so the Jedi Starfighters, if you watch any of those little webisodes or behind the scenes things for the prequels, when he's talking to the design team and the art department, he says, like, okay, we're going to make a Jedi Starfighter, but I want to make it look a little bit like the Star Destroyer, because that's ultimately where they got that design. And, okay, the Republic cruisers, they basically are Star Destroyers with a couple notches cut out of the sides. So there are plenty of kind of retro designs in the prequels as well, where he's saying, like, all right, I want to make, you want to make sure that it isn't completely new visually. And he understood that, and I think he understands that. In Episode 7, yeah, you had the X-Wing, you have the TIE Fighter, you have a Star Destroyer that looks a little different. You still have Stormtroopers, they look slightly different. But you had Clone Troopers in the prequels as well, right? But you do have new designs, right? Ray Speeder is new, and that, I think, is becoming very memorable and kind of iconic already. You have what's his name? Kylo Ren's landing ship, which the silhouette of it's certainly based on the old shuttles from the original trilogy, but it's changed in such a way that it's sort of a newish design. It's a newish look. It's certainly at least as new as like the Jedi Starfighters were, which, the cockpit was essentially the TIE cockpit stretched out. And the what was it? I lost it. So there's the Falcon, there's a TIE Fighter, there's the X-Wing, these kind of retro ideas, but there's enough new stuff in Episode 7 that to say like, well, they didn't put any new spaceships or new planets. Like, I don't think that's as fair.
Well,
but his broader point that like, yeah, and I think Abrams has even said this, and so I don't understand how you can really argue that much with Lucas, where Abrams has said, look, we knew that we wanted to take one step backward in order to move forward, right? We wanted to call back to those original trilogy films in order to introduce these new characters and move forward with a new cast of characters.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's like he makes this comment, and then Lucas will make that comment, and then he'll like, oh, Star Wars isn't about spaceships, it's about families and stuff like that.
Right.
It's about the story I wanted to tell. Now, I'm not.
No, it's not about the story. It's about the visuals.
Yeah,
it's
so
about
he
an art
changes
film
his mind.
Making a tone poem.
The truth is, if is it the story or is it the visuals? Because if we're going to say, well, if he puts his foot down and it's about those signature visuals, then maybe George needs to realize that he's not an artist. He doesn't sit down there with a pen and paper, and a lot of times, even up to like when the design of the Millennium Falcon, he was like, when he realized the idea he had was way too close to the thing his designers had made were far too close to the main ship on this show called Space 1999 that probably none of you have ever heard of. But at the time, it was very popular, and he said, well, we can't have our heroes flying around in a ship that looks just like that ship, so change it. And they, in the conventional history is like that they asked him, what should we do? And he goes, well, his favorite thing was eating hamburgers or something. And he goes, oh, make it look like a hamburger. Right. And really, I watched this interview where they had like a lot of the model makers sitting around, and basically they claim what his thing was is like, I don't care. You can make it look like a UFO. Just don't make it look like that Space 1999 ship. It wasn't a thing like where he goes, oh, it represents this or it represents that, because at the end of the day, they were just the dressing on a story that he was trying to tell. But then he wants to have it both ways. He wants to say, no, my visuals, it's always about me pushing the visuals forward. And it's like that. He's being disingenuous when he's saying that. And I understand. Yeah. I mean, when we get to the end, I don't want to make this review show all about Lucas because he's not involved in this, but there's a lot of things that were said in that Charlie Rose interview recently that kind of like, I can totally understand where he's coming from, because the guy's working something. He is literally, like he said before, it's a divorce. He's going through a divorce, and this is something he decided to. It isn't a thing where one day Star Wars woke up and said, I'm running off. He decided to break this up. He ended this marriage.
Yeah.
And he's obviously got very complex feelings about this.
Yeah, and he always had kind of contradictory ideas in his head about what Star Wars meant, and what made Star Wars what it was. Because in a sense, he never really understood why it became so popular so quickly. But I guess and I didn't want to make this all about the Lucas interview, but it's relevant, because again, you said that you thought Abrams took some chances. I saw less of that. And then there's a review that I think the website's called like Reverse Shot, that has a review of this that I thought was pretty good and pretty fair. It was a fair critique. And they made the point that there wasn't really a lot that was new in Star Wars. Like the newest thing in Episode 7 is Finn's character, right? This idea of a stormtrooper who turns good. That's something we haven't really seen in Star Wars before. But the rest of it, whether it's directly taken from A New Hope or not, like in a general sense, like a lot of this was stuff we've seen before. And so that was sort of how I felt. And so I'm curious to know what you saw about what you saw that represented Abrams taking chances with Star Wars to you.
Well, if I could put one kind of an umbrella over my idea of what taking chances is, the one thing they did in this movie that they have never done before is they actually put some real emotional depth into a Star Wars film, which may or may, was I found kind of a welcome change. It's almost like Star Wars becomes almost more of what it is in your head than what it is on the screen sometimes.
Mm-hmm, sure.
Like the way we ascribe when we watch things, like, oh, it's so telling when Luke is doing this and that, and it's like, no, things happen, and there is a real emotional consequence. There's the idea that that we actually see our villains, well, at least one of our villains in the Kylo Ren thing, there's that running joke now, and there's that he's the emo guy, but you actually see this real conflict within this character that we know very little about. Whereas, in the originals, it was always this idea that, like, instead of showing the conflict, they would literally have the Emperor like go, I don't see this like you do. It's like, are you sure you're not conflicted? And then he would be like, oh, I'm not conflicted. And it's like, there was a depth to it. It almost felt, even though it's in space and there's a lot of stuff that happens for expedience of the story, I felt like there was a lot of an emotional weight inside the film, and it wasn't just something that I would bring to it. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think he was afraid to, some people were simple. Some people's motivations, like, if I don't want to get too critical right off the bat, but I mean, the motivations of some of the new characters of, Finn's, kind of, conversion or whatever, and Rey's kind of irrational desire to stay on Jakku, like, even when confronted with the fact that, you're in a bad scene, and, oh no, I have to keep getting back there, and this kind of, like, I mean, some of it gets the short shrift. I mean, other chances are it's like obviously spoilers abound. Where I'm not going to worry about spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie yet, then why are you listening to this? Yeah. They kill off Han Solo, which, I've already heard some people kind of complain that they felt that, like, that was a cheap death, and I don't agree. I mean, yes, there is a practical concern, is that it would be almost impossible to get Harrison Ford to sign up do a 2-picture deal or whatever. And really, the fact that Han Solo's death, his demise, has been an event that's been hovering around this franchise for 30 plus years. It's something everybody knows that he wanted a part of, but it was the thing that they were afraid to do, or Lucas didn't want to do it because he just didn't want to cast a strange pallor over that final movie. And the fact that, that they would, obviously it's a concern. Like I said, it's a logistical concern. How are you going to get Harrison Ford to even sign up for 2 of these things? But the fact that they did it. And the fact is, and it goes to show you that really, like, your old favorites, they're not safe. And also the fact that they took a major character, and they essentially gave him not even a cameo, just a wordless appearance of just, I don't know what you call it, eye acting or face acting. Like, Luke Skywalker is now, I would not, some people have said, oh, it wasn't as a successful, like, he would say, I wanted Luke's presence to be a kind of a specter over this whole film, and I would agree that it didn't do that, but the payoff at the end was incredible. But the idea that, they could have easily written Luke into that last, quarter of the movie or whatever. And they didn't. They said, no, we're going to adhere to this. This is Han Solo's story. This is what you always wanted to see. This is kind of like, this is Han and Chewbacca doing what they were doing before they joined up with the rebellion. And it's this kind of, like, story. They kept their story focused. They didn't get too far out into the weeds with the mystical stuff, really. Yeah. And honestly, it's like, they could have, I don't know. It's the idea where people say, this was a reaction to. I mean, they could have easily have put a lot of gobbledygook in it, like the prequels and stuff, and kept it as like, you know, a tight theme or whatever. You know, it could have. I don't know. Maybe it's not that's not really taking a chance. Maybe I need to walk that back a little bit. But I do feel like that really the umbrella that I'm talking about is they gave these characters at least our old characters, an emotional depth that has never been in any Star Wars film before. And I've been watching them a lot lately because, you know, I come home and I'm like, well, I can't watch episode 7, but I can watch, you know, 1 through 6 again. And I've been watching them, and it's like a lot of that emotional growth that we talk about it's transmitted through wardrobe. It's transmitted through haircuts. It's transmitted through music. And what Abrams was able to do, and I'm not a huge J.J. Abrams fan. If anything, I would, you know, I've spent a lot of time on the show kind of crapping on him.
Yeah,
I think
and put a pin in that because we'll come back to that.
Yeah, and I think that he really was able to unlock, maybe in concert with Lawrence Kasdan, they were able to kind of, the idea of, you know, just the sorrow of the fact that they, you know, not only did Han and Leia not turn out to be the great love affair that we all thought it was going to be, that it turned out to end, and their shame about what happened to their child, and their child is now the biggest asshole in space. And it's like, oh fuck, it happened again. We had, you know, we thought we defeated the Empire, and no, we you know, it's like the cancer. They cut up, they thought they cut it all out, but there was just enough cells for it to start growing again out there, and it came home to roost. And some of these people, you know, have had to pay the ultimate price for their, in some ways, their hubris. This idea that, oh, like, we're the good guys and the good guys win, and once the good guys win, we don't need to worry about it again. It's kind of, it's a real idea that we think that, you know, it's, I think, because something horrible happened in the past and we were able to beat it, that somehow we've inured ourselves into ever having it happen again. And to me, that's something that never showed up in the originals. So in that respect, I think he took a chance adding all that emotion, because I'm sitting there thinking about, it's like, you know, yeah, how do you deal with that? It's like essentially it's like a child dying, and when they lose him like that. And I think that was in the way that they took a chance letting the actors act in a way that was kind of like, whoa. Because, I mean, Lucas has always had that issue where it's like, if you watch the prequels especially, there's that real problem where a lot of the scenes look like, well, that's the one that, you know, the lighting was right.
Right.
Because we're able to cast, you know, Ahmet Best, you know, Jar Jar looks better in that light, and we had lighting better that day, and it's like, well, yeah, but the line reading on it is terrible. Well, it's like, well, we actually cut that in half, and that's half of this and half of the other thing. A lot of that, I felt like generally that these people, you know, Mark Hamill in a split second. So I'm not, yeah, but I mean, Harrison Ford, at least, he gave a full performance. Mm-hmm. And the weight of, like, even though that the old EU is in the trash now, it's like, no, I feel like, you know, 32 years have passed for Han Solo, not just Harrison Ford, you know? And I think that's a chance that Lucas would not have taken if he had decided to make these films himself.
I don't think he would have, or I'm skeptical of the idea that he would have had certainly Harrison Ford in such a prominent role, and maybe even, you know, Hamill and Carrie Fisher in their roles. He almost certainly would have brought Anthony Daniels back.
There would have been a lot more gimmicks, and there would have been more. And there's gimmicks and there's gags, because that's a Star Wars film. You know, they all have gimmicks and gags, but the idea of, like, taking, you know, at least, you know, the big three and holding one of them back to the last scene, that could have easily have backfired. You could have had like every fanboy on the planet walking out going, fuck you, you know, J.J. Abrams,
Right.
no, you know, bring back Luke Skywalker hashtags. And
Yeah.
and yeah, there's people go, I was like, you know, hey, I walked out slightly disappointed, but then I realized it was like the meal that I had been served was so good to me that the fact that the dessert was like, you know, a little thing on a little plate, it was like I was already full. After they blew up the, you know, Starkiller base, which, you know, we can debate whether, you know, just is it at this point are super weapons just, you know, just going to be the de rigueur of every Star Wars movie, and I would probably say yes. Yeah. But when that blew up, I don't know if it was the editing or if it was kind of a miscalculation. I felt like, oh, that was great. But we still have, you know, I still have another half an hour of film, so we get to find out what's going on with Luke. Mm-hmm. And then I'm sitting there in the theater expecting, okay, this is interesting. They're going to actually blow up the, you know, quote, Death Star or the super weapon in the last, you know, and give us a whole nother half an hour of film that we're going to think. This will be interesting. And then all of a sudden I'm like, they haven't said anything in like a minute, and there's music going and it's swelling up. I'm like, oh my God, this is the denouement. Oh my God, this is it. This is all we're getting. And at first I was like, and it was like, you know, but then it was perfect. That idea that, you know, it's almost like watching some kind of old kung fu movie with the idea that the apprentice full of fear, not really knowing what, you know, because there's still people thinking that it was like, you could end with like Luke with the red eyes going, you know, what are you doing here, and electrocuting, which I knew was never going to happen because, but I'm sure there were certain people that were like, well, what's going to go on? Did he go bad? And you know, this whole, it just, I don't know. It kind of brought it home in this really, the emotional depth of it. And I mean, we could do a whole nother show is, you know, who is Rey, and, you know, and what is her connection to Luke, and and in the last 2 weeks I've heard every speculation. I've heard some that I was like, when I watched the movie, I didn't take that away from it, and people who are far better film critics than I could ever be took away a whole different experience from, like, say, Rey's vision and all these you know, I mean, I will concede that, you know, there are things that they kind of like said, oh, they did that again. You know, they did this again. Right. But anyway, I've talked too much.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of, right, so you talked about, to sum up, and I hope I get this right, but, you know, in terms of the chances that you thought they took with Star Wars, but just actually imbuing the movie with emotions rather than sort of gesturing towards them, right? Like actually putting them in there. And I think there's something to that. And I think you're right that, you know, a lot of, you're saying that a lot of the emotions that we as the viewers get from those scenes come from, you know, the haircuts or the wardrobe or the music. I think the music, certainly. Yeah. I would say, at least for, you know, the really big Star Wars fans, I would say that a lot of that emotion that people kind of take out of those scenes, or you know, the deeper meaning towards the gestures or whatever, a lot of that comes from the EU material or the extra film material, right? The radio dramas or the novelizations, or, you know, so it almost feels like, you know, some of those EU novels, they threw these scenes in to the books to say, like, all right, well, we have to explain why that scene in the movie was important and emotional for these characters, because the movie doesn't really do that. And so then you read that and you're like, oh, wow, so that gives the scene in the movie so much deeper meaning, when really, like, if they hadn't written that book, or if they, you know, they hadn't talked about that scene in the book or in the radio drama or whatever, you wouldn't necessarily have felt that way, that the scene had so much emotion behind it or whatever. But whereas you, I think, focused on the sorrow in terms of kind of the emotion of the movie, I was struck by just how much joy there was in this movie, which you don't really get from either the original trilogy or the Phantom Menace or any of the sequels. The prequels. Sorry, either the original trilogy or the prequels. You don't get a lot of joy as an emotion, right? You get a lot of relief, certainly, and you get happiness. Certainly, you get kind of happiness and joy at the end of A New Hope. There's basically none in Empire because that's not the kind of movie it is. Jedi, you get it from Nine Num and Lando when they blow up the second Death Star. And then I guess if you want to count the Ewok celebration. Phantom Menace, I suppose the parade at the end after Naboo defeats the battle droids, right? There's that big parade and everything, which most of the joy, it's computer generated. It's not.
Yeah. And every human participant looks slightly bemused by that, right. Everyone just goes, and honestly, there's haircuts in that, you know what I mean? Right. She's wearing a celebratory dress that V's her, that light down to her face, and
right. And I don't think in Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith there's like any joy at all.
No.
Whereas in this movie, just Oscar Isaac, Poe Dameron alone just radiates joy in almost every scene he's in. Even when he is captured and is being tortured and interrogated by Kylo Ren, right? He's certainly not feeling joyful or happy, but he still has this kind of like positive attitude, like, no, you're not going to get it. Like I'm, I'll be fine. I'm going to get out of this. You're not going to get the information you want. We'll defeat you. Right. This kind of, he's very upbeat. Even there's this undercurrent of him being upbeat, even in that situation. Right. So, but every other scene, that character, he's like smiling and like, yeah, we're going to get out of this, man. Don't you worry. Or, hey, it's great to see you. Or, yeah, I'm a great pilot. Or,
there's no suspicion in him.
Right.
Which to me, if all of a sudden a stormtrooper would come up to me and say, I'm going to get you out of here, my first thing would be out of my mind would be like, yeah, I'll follow this guy and then I'm going to shoot him in the back as we get out of here because he's probably lying to me. But his whole thing is like, we're going to do
He's
this.
just so positive and upbeat. And so, just that character alone, almost every scene he's in, there's just joy on the screen. And if there's joy with Finn and Rey when they first are flying the Falcon and they're like talking over each other about how good of a job the other one did. And, Finn when he when he's in the TIE fighter escaping with Poe and he's like, oh, did you see that? And less and less with Finn as the movie goes forward and less with Rey as the movie goes forward. But they're still there. even with Rey, as I said, on the Falcon, and there's a little bit later too. But that's an emotion that's relatively new, and especially in the volume at which we get it in the movie. I think that is probably the newest thing to me that I took out of this, and I was like, okay, that's something that's new to a Star Wars movie. And it's probably too easy to take that to like an armchair psychologist dimension and say like, well, maybe that kind of reflects the people making these movies where, J.J. Abrams is just so happy and excited and, can't believe his luck that he is making a Star Wars movie. And like, oh my God, I get to work with Harrison Ford. I get to see Harrison Ford sitting in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. And oh my God, I get to go to this recording session with John Williams. It kind of infuses the process. Whereas Lucas, hates being a director, and he's just miserable the whole. He's admitted this himself. Like it's on camera where he's saying this. He's miserable the whole time. He just hates being there, and when he's done, it's a relief. It's like, oh, thank God, I don't have to talk to those people anymore.
Yeah, he doesn't like actors. He doesn't like writing.
Right.
He doesn't like having to explain to the people that he employs, his ideas.
I just tell you what my idea is, and
why can't you
show me what
that?
you do, and then I'll tell you what I think is wrong about it. And so, like I said, it's probably too easy to suggest that that's the difference. That's the big difference, and that's why this one's so much more joyful than the others. But that was kind of the biggest new thing, the biggest change that I did notice in this movie. The rest of it, it other than that, I will say that I don't know that I saw a lot in Star Wars that was like, wow, I haven't seen that before. That's something new. Even, they took us to new planets, but like, okay, it's forests. Like, okay, great. Or, or even, as gorgeous as Skellig Michael is, right? You kind of know in the back of your head, like, okay, this is, other than the expansive ocean around it, perhaps, like this is a real place. Like this is a thing that exists in the world as we know it. This isn't like a sinkhole planet or a termite, sand castle planet, or that I would agree. Like there's a lot less of that. That in many ways, I think they did kind of play it safe and say like, all right, we want to just make people confident that we, meaning Disney and J.J. Abrams to an extent, but the broader, I think he was very aware of the fact that he was, this was Disney's first job and he was working for Disney on their first go at this, that, making people confident or at least relieved or say like, all right, they're competent. They know how these things are kind of supposed to go. So we'll have a sense of trust going forward that the rest of them will be okay.
Yeah.
Right. That they wanted a sense of like, oh, okay, don't worry. We know what we're doing when we're making a Star Wars movie.
And it's like he almost set, like J.J. Abrams almost set like half a tone. It's like, well, I have to have some Lucas tone in here. So I only get to put about half or maybe even a third of my ideas in this. Because it's like, I hate to, I've been saying this a lot anecdotally when people ask me about, like, because I was just, doing family stuff, and everybody's like, oh yeah, you're the Star Wars guy. Let's talk about Star Wars with Robert. And it's just the idea that, and I hate to say this, it's like, well, they spent $4.2 billion on this franchise. It's not like they weren't going to change it up in the first out of the gate and it makes in like, oh, here's this new thing. We've completely pushing it forward into the 21st century. I just think that people would not, even the people that are complaining that it's a retread, I don't think you'd been happy if it had been a whole new thing. If it had been completely different and all new ships, it would have been disorientating. It would have been like, it almost all your old favorites might have looked a little weird in it, and it might have been like almost the story would have made them feel like they weren't welcome.
Right.
That kind of idea where it's like, step aside, old man, it's the new regime, which I never felt like there was any
right, there's a reverence for like, you're Han Solo, you're the Han Solo,
Yeah, I always think it's like, I think about that conversation that we had that I kept hammering down, that like, oh, there's something happened. The reason that Luke's gone is that this horrible thing happened and he's ashamed of it. It's not that the Jedi are mythical. And I was obviously wrong. It's both. It's like the Jedi are still a myth because something, partly because something really bad happened. It's that, I mean, I guess the trailer, going to the trailer, it was the trailer, I appreciate it so much more now than even when I first saw it. Because it doesn't give the story away. It's like, it was I guess I didn't really, maybe I just turned off my critical mind that first viewing, and then subsequently maybe I did the opposite. You were more critical the first time around, and I was more critical maybe the third time around. But this idea of this kind of beautiful misdirection where they were able to kind of play everybody like a harp, but they didn't essentially give you something that was like so disorientating that you left the. Like, I always feel like the day that I walked the night in 1999 when I walked out of the Lewis and Clark Theater in Burien, Washington, having seen The Phantom Menace, kind of like, it wasn't like I was sitting there and go like, that sucks. No, I felt a little like gut punched at how disorientated, how I didn't seem to understand the world that I had just seen at all.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like Star Wars to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I keep saying it's like, well, The Force Awakens feels like Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
It truly does. I will say this, there's not a drop of George Lucas in this movie. You know, the idea that, you know, I can tell that he had zero creative input aside from his legacy characters that that were bought. There is a kind of, you know, and that's I don't know, I don't want to jump on one of your questions. Do you ask about the fan fiction one aspect?
Little bit.
Okay, well maybe
but you can go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's no way I can sit here and go that this movie is not fan fiction. Of course it is. Mm-hmm. The minute George Lucas is not integrally involved in Star Wars, it becomes fan fiction.
Yeah.
And it always will be. But what we're experiencing right now is a kind of a rarity because, you know, Lucas, he on his own accord decided, you know, if you watch the Charlie Rose interview, which I keep go look on, it's on Hulu. I think you can watch it for free. That, you know, basically he concedes that this sale to Disney was not because he had lost his love for Star Wars, is that he had realized that there was more days behind him than ahead of him, and that there's a certain sadness. It was like it wasn't.
I think he just didn't have he knew that he didn't have the energy for it.
Yeah, he's got like a 2-year-old kid and stuff. He just knew. It's like when you start to plan your. You all right over there?
Yeah, sorry, just the pop filter just fell.
Oh. Just that idea that he knew there's no way I can complete this satisfactorily in my lifetime. Because it almost felt like from the Charlie Rose thing, he was pretty much he was maybe gonna direct at least the first one. And maybe he was gonna try like an original trilogy thing. Although he let it slip that basically he said that, you know, he claims directorship on all of them in some ways because he kind of said his idea that
he was standing over the director's shoulder saying,
I'll just give this up, and he said that lasted about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a guy who's, you know, looking at his own mortality and just kind of like shaking his head saying, I have all these stories I want to tell.
Yeah.
And it's not because he wasted his time. It's just because we are only given, you know, so much time to complete our work. And Lucas is looking at that. I mean, the sad to hear thing, I might not be here in 10 years.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, the other part of it, too, the less sad part of it, or maybe bittersweet or sad in a different way, is that the Kennedy Center honors were recently, and he received one, and it's sort of like a time when other people were essentially reflecting on his career. It's like, all right, you're pretty much done. Thank you for your time. And so, you know, that probably made him reflective on what his career has been like and meant. And that essentially means Star Wars more than anything else. And so it's maybe not about his mortality necessarily, but the fact that he was receiving this award that it was essentially like a career achievement award.
Right.
So I'll say that was probably part of it.
I mean, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you know, and maybe because I feel like I know him, even though I've never met the man and I never will, and I just read so much about him. I think what he's doing, in some ways, I almost thank him for publicly giving these interviews because, like, yeah, he sounds like an old crank to a lot of people, and he does. I mean, but the thing is, like, if we really sat down and looked at our lives and then had somebody record it and play it back to us, yeah, we'd all probably look like old cranks in our own ways.
Yeah.
And, you know, he got to do it his way. And think about the only other person I can think of that, you know, maybe parallels, and think is like a Gene Roddenberry, who was, you know, essentially maybe 20, 25 years older than Lucas. I don't know. I forget how. So he basically lost Star Trek over time.
Mm-hmm.
Every year he was less and less integral to the world of Star Trek, which is, Star Wars and Star Trek are like, those are like the two greatest, exports of in the last 45 years of in entertainment and storytelling. It's like they're uniquely, even though they use bits and pieces from all world cinema, it's like a uniquely American export, kind of like jazz. I hate whenever he uses jazz, but everybody says jazz is the quintessential American musical export. It's something that could only have been created in America. And that's what I think of Star Wars and Star Trek. And the idea that, reading like one of William Shatner's, like he wrote a book, I think it was Star Trek Movie Memories, one of his memoirs about...
Not Tech War?
Not his Tech Wars. But, Gene Roddenberry, I mean, that Star Trek was him, and the ideas, some of his ideas now are even like that he talks about, at least when he used to pontificate on the world that he had created. Some of the ideas they have are still extremely progressive in 2015. That like stuff that maybe even society, like as much as we like to think we're always improving and stuff, there are things we're not even ready for as a culture to accept. And his contribution is so big, but at the end it was a running joke. They stuck him in an office in the back of Paramount, and his notes would get thrown in the trash, and they would kind of treat him like this redheaded stepchild of this thing. And he created that. And in some ways, Lucas being spared that, the only indignity was that and we know how Lucas works, is that he probably handed them like 3 crumpled handwritten pages with very loose, like the first movie, Luke and his son start a Jedi Academy on, some planet with 18 syllables, and then the so-and-so show up, the Sith witches show up, and then it's like, and then the second one, it's like, wait a second, this is all. He probably didn't give them very much to start with.
Yeah.
So for him to grouse and go, oh, they didn't like my ideas, it's like, well, you probably didn't. Knowing how George is, he probably didn't really give them much to go on.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling how the guy should feel, but I'm saying, I think in the end, he'll be happy that he has created something that actually will exist aside from him. I mean, Edgar Rice Burroughs, he created all these, Tarzan and stuff, and they've gone on. I mean, in a smaller scale, writers like Robert E. Howard, creating, Conan the Barbarian, and having it be something that, to this day, that every 30 or 40 years they make another one. And, it's definitely influenced cinema and storytelling. I mean, the whole fantasy genre is basically, you're either Conan the Barbarian or it's The Hobbit. I mean, it's, and I think that's what Lucas has to realize, is that, he kind of, on the Charlie Rose thing, he was, lamenting all the horrible Star Wars knockoffs that arrived after I assume he means Battlestar Galactica, because that's like something he had a real hard on for when it came out. I mean, he sued him and stuff like that. That suit only went away when when lawyers kind of pointed out the 15 things he stole from Frank Herbert in Dune. It's like he has to, he decided to let it go, but he's going through those emotions in a very public way, and it probably really sucks to see that the one Star Wars that you're not involved on is going to be not only the highest grossing Star Wars film, but probably the highest grossing film of all time, because it's on track for that right now. And it's gotta hurt, because it's like even though he sold it and he's not senile and nobody tricked him, and nobody said, oh, you're going to be, I'm sure Disney never said you're going to be involved in every aspect of this. No, they probably told him up front. It's like, we'd love to have you, but we are going in a different direction. And even he said he knew that it would just be constant fighting, because he's a bit of a control freak when it comes to Star Wars, as he should be, because that's his baby. But in some ways, he saved Star Wars by giving it up. Because if he had sat around and said, I don't care if I die in the middle of making it, I'm going to make 3 more. We would have been all excited, and then we would have watched, in the first 20 minutes, it would have been like episode 1 all over again. And we all just would have went, ugh.
Yeah.
Or he couldn't have, maybe he might not have been able to have gotten Harrison Ford involved. I mean, I don't know the time.
I mean, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, I think it would have been, it's not like it would have been his version of the movie we got. Like, we probably would have gotten something dramatically different. Like, I don't think Harrison Ford would have been involved at all, and I'm not even sure that Hamill and Fisher would have been.
And I thank him because it honestly, in some respects, him kind of sacrificing and giving, for $4.2 billion, what a sacrifice.
Right.
But him giving up his creation, it's like he actually gave it new life, even for someone like me, because essentially before this whole like rigmarole started, I was done with Star Wars. It's like, I was like, okay, you had a good run, but you're 35. Take the Star Wars posters down off the wall and get some other hobbies. Take up banjo or knitting or something. It's like, come on, dude.
Yep.
You only have so many years. In some ways, though, it gave me kind of like a second chance to get excited about this, because if he had said like, "Oh, I'm making them, but it's going to be, they're all going to be like 15-year-old Jedi wizards or something," and nobody from the original movies are going to be in it. I wouldn't go down that road again. I was like, I wasn't watching the cartoons, I wasn't reading the books. There were no video games. It's like, I was kind of done with this. And it just the idea that it's like, no, there's still more here. And, the story that we still have more to tell about your favorites. Your favorites didn't just go off into the sunset. It's like, they have a story and we want to tell it, and these people are going to tell it. And to me, that's exciting. Now we could sit here and and maybe we've gotten more theoretical than anything. It's like this is probably the strangest movie review that you've ever heard, because we've covered like we spent very little time talking about moments from the movie, but
yeah. So I'll move on to the next question then. What before this movie, there was a point at which you and I were like, all right, we're going to stop paying attention to what we're hearing because we want to go in fresh. But, there was so much information out there, and we watched the trailers and the teasers, and, on this very podcast, we would cover casting news and, little bits and pieces of like, oh, did you see they showed what Leia's costume looks like and things like that. Did seeing those teasers and those trailers and did finding out little bits of information about the movie side characters, learning about, oh, look, this toy got released with Sarko Plank and, that whatever. Yak Face, not Yak Face. I keep calling him Yak Face because, but Bullhead is now Elo Asti, and maybe that's a Beastie Boys reference. All of that stuff about characters, even who maybe weren't even on screen for very long. Did having all of that information, did knowing all that stuff in any way affect your enjoyment of the movie, or even just how you watch the movie in general?
I would say, and I've thought about this a lot, I would
say
it enhanced it.
Mm-hmm.
That is how I enjoy a Star Wars movie. It's the trailers, it's the baby leaks, it's the toy leaks, it's the some print in some place in France accidentally posted the soundtrack for 10 seconds. And now I didn't look at that one, but yeah, I mean, I've come to realize that, spoiling myself in little bits and pieces, and like reading like, a year and a half ago, there's this whole thing about like that the first shot of the new Star Wars movie is going to be Luke's lightsaber floating through space, which it I guess was in the concept, but it actually had been deleted or something like that. I mean, that to me, that's part of it. It's almost like knowing how much you want to be spoiled going in. I'm like, I'm kind of like minorly spoiled, and I got to the point where I actually, when I walked in, I sat down, I said, all right, you think you know all these things. Don't think about it. Just experience it as it is. And I think I actually, the first time, except for the whole thing, like, oh, we're going to have another half hour of Luke, I think I did pretty good at just kind of accepting what I was seeing at the time and not trying to constantly readjust this narrative inside of my head of what I think the movie was going to be. I think I did it I was pretty successful, because that was a big thing for me. It's like, dude, you think don't go in thinking that you know how this is going to be. Just let it be what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, the whole the behind the scenes 3-minute thing that they showed, and the teasers and the full trailer. I mean, enjoying all that to me, that's become part of enjoying a Star Wars movie. It's like there's a couple people I've heard, like Slash Film has a podcast that they did. If you want more of a straight review after you hear this, you might want to go over to them, where they kind of do a 2-hour thing. And there's one guy named Jeff Kanata who had not seen a trailer. Had not read an article, barely knew who was in. He only knew the general casting ideas, and he said he actually only saw the poster for a split second, and he walked in, because that's his whole thing. He's like a super anti-trailer, anti-spoiler guy, and he still enjoyed the movie, but then everybody kind of gave him shit about it, because dude, you missed out on 6 months of really fun anticipation and being able to talk about it and speculate and kind of covet these essentially at the end of the day become meaningless, because some, like Eloasti, it's I don't even remember if I even saw that guy. I mean, I think
he was barely in the movie.
Didn't he get blown up or something like that?
Yeah, he did.
And it's
no more Eloasti.
And it's yeah, you're missing. I think that is kind of part of experiencing a film like that, whereas I don't think that, I think a movie which I haven't seen yet is the Hateful Eight. It's I think I would have been better off if I hadn't seen the trailer to that, and just walk in and it's a new Quentin Tarantino movie, and what you're gonna, kind of what you're gonna get when it's a Quentin Tarantino movie. And you don't, I know there's people out there who read the script already and things like that, and it's,
yeah,
I don't think that his kind of, that kind of filmmaking, quote, grown-up films necessarily benefit from, going in with a bunch of information in your head. Whereas these kind of, as George would say, kid movies, I think that's actually a great way to enjoy it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting to me about it when I was thinking of it is a lot of that kind of stuff that we would have gotten with the previous films. Certainly the original trilogy, and I think even the prequels too, right? A lot of that kind of information would have come out after the film, right? It would have been built up in the EU. There would have been, the Encyclopedia of Star Wars, or, whatever, that would have said, oh, by the way, this character is this guy, and, here's who Sarko Plank is and does, or here's what a Tito is, and, here's who that bullhead guy is, and here's who that other guy. I don't even know how to describe him.
Oh, what's that? Who's the guy, the Constable Zuvio? And
oh yeah. Well, yeah, that wouldn't have even come up. But now we know Constable Zuvio, who's not in the movie. But right, so I think it was just interesting. That all of that was happening sort of before and concurrent with the movie coming out, and so now fans are like, "Oh, we know all this information," and it, in theory, it's supposed to kind of imbue the film with more depth, for those people, more world building. I don't know that it did for me though. In terms of the trailers and everything, knowing that most of what we had seen was just in the first 30 minutes was kind of helpful, actually, watching the movie, before I went into the movie, knowing okay, there's still going to be a lot of stuff that I don't know is going to happen. But at the same time, having seen the trailers, it's so one of the big moments in the film, right, is Poe and Finn steal a TIE fighter and they crash on Jakku. Finn wakes up and Poe's not there, and he just assumes that Poe died in the crash, right? That his body was incinerated.
Right.
And all that's left is his wicked jacket. And then, of course, Poe shows up later, and it's meant to be this like surprise and like, oh my gosh, he's still alive and he's back, yay! But if you've seen the trailers, you know, and if you remember the trailers, you had seen scenes that could only have come after Poe wasn't in the TIE fighter anymore, right?
Right.
The moment between them on
the broing out,
on the tarmac, you know, him flying the X-wing, right? You hadn't seen those at any point in the movie when they crashed the TIE fighter. So having seen those, you're like, all right, so he's not dead and he's just going to show up later. Okay. I get what it's sort of like, okay, I get what you're doing, but you've already showed us in the trailer that he will still be alive. So, it's not working, right? So that moment I was like, all right, I get what you're doing, but I know too much for this to work on me. But even stuff like, you know, the fact that Nine Numb is in this movie, like, to me, he never speaks. They never refer to him as Nine Numb.
right?
When he's on screen, that could have been any Celestin, right? That didn't have to be Nine Numb. Akbar being in the war room, like, yeah, I guess when he talks, you recognize that voice, but I'm sure for most, certainly the casual fans, like, they're not going to recognize his voice necessarily. They're just going to assume, like, oh, that's one of those squid guys again.
Right.
We got another squid guy in this movie without necessarily knowing that that's Akbar. So, like, the stuff like that, I think, like, well, why didn't it have to be those? You know, it didn't have to be those guys. Like, and that's like, yeah, I get it. You want to bring those guys back to reassure the fans, and as this kind of like safety security blanket kind of thing. You know, fan service, I guess. But they didn't like call it out enough for it to really be fan service. I think, like, if they had given those characters bigger roles or had like named them in the movie, then I think that probably would have qualified more as fan service. But having them there,
well, would you have preferred that they had somebody else in those, that they just gone?
Kind of. I mean, that's an area where I think I would have been fine maybe if it was, you know, a Mon Cal and a Celestin who were just different people, different character. Like, I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine with them being Akbar and Nine Numb. Like, great, excellent. I love those characters, but mostly, I mean, the only reason really that people like those characters is because they like the designs, they like the voices, right? Those characters don't really do that much.
Yeah, but they
don't do enough.
They don't have a story
in the original trilogy for people to have like a real emotional connection with them. And so bringing them back, like those specific characters, it's like, all right, I guess. You know, if they were just a random Mon Cal and a random Celestin with different names, I think that would have been perfectly fine. If they were different, if they gave those roles, it feels weird to say this, but if they gave those roles to different alien species entirely, that would have been fine. Like, you know, the fact that it was Akbar and Nine Numb, I don't think added anything really for me. And others will disagree, and that's fine. But at least for me, I don't know that it added anything. You know, for the scenes on Jakku, I was kind of looking. I had forgotten about Constable Zuvio at that point, so I wasn't looking for him. But like, oh, Sarko Plank, I want to see where he is, and I want to see that alien that's, you know, kind of with the long neck and it's carrying the really tall pack. I want to see that because that looked really cool, and I want to make sure that I see the. You know, one of the characters from Maz Kanata's castle with the red helmet and everything. Like, I want to make sure I catch that guy, and you know, so that it was kind of like neat to be like, oh, I want to see them, but they're not in the movie for long enough to like for their presence there to mean much at this point. You know, and that's where, you know, building up those characters outside of the movies, to get back to sort of an idea we were talking about earlier. You know, those characters will get built up outside of the movies. You know, that short story, The Crimson Corsair or whatever, you know, that's going to talk more about that character. And so kids or adults reading those books and stories, that's how they'll establish that connection to those characters. And that, right, there's no way they were going to release any of that stuff before the movie. Like that is all stuff almost necessarily has to come after the movie, or at least concurrent with the movie. So the rest of it, like building up that stuff before the movie, I don't know that the payoff was really that great. I guess is how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of that there's a continuity with these characters, the aliens, and that, like, oh, it's the same aliens. I don't have to I don't have to give any mental energy into like trying to figure that out. But it's not 11 numb, right? And it's like, but then, kind of to your point, that if I would point out some of the stuff that I wasn't as in love with, or just flat out thought was a kind of a missed opportunity, and that definitely centers around the whole middle act at Maz Kanata's castle, which in a lot of storytelling wise I felt was kind of a failure. I mean, if my whole criticism around this movie would be around that, because it was like it's like, okay, they redid the cantina scene again, and then they made the mistake of not showing not really making it they've never been able to improve. Like, even George Lucas has never been able to improve on that cantina scene. He did that cantina scene under duress with, whatever Rick Baker had in his studio at the time in a half-built set in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And then he spent 40 years trying to fix it and has never been able to improve it. Then he tried to do it, he tried to do it in Return of the Jedi, and then he had to, then he had to fix it later on again, and he still never fixed it. Then he tried to do it again in Attack of the Clones, and he didn't do it. It's like,
right.
It's almost like, it's like a cursed scene or something that, and then J.J. Abrams tries to, improve on it, and he doesn't do it. He comes up with all these great characters and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, yeah, I thought Lin-Manuel Miranda's music was fine. It was pretty nondescript.
Yeah. Oh, let's, I mean, we can do a whole show on.
And I don't think they meant for it to be like, oh, stay tuned for Lin-Manuel Miranda's music, because it came out so late in the process that it was just like a throwaway. Oh, by the way, he wrote a song for the cantina scene.
That was a total missed opportunity, in my opinion.
I mean, at the same time, like, I don't want what Lucas did with the special editions, where now you get a song that completely stops the movie while everyone is watching this band perform the song. I don't want that.
Right.
I do think that maybe the camera moved a little too quickly through the cantina, so that you didn't really get that good of a look at all of the creatures.
Yeah.
With a few exceptions, those being the ones who then became important later. I thought Maz Kanata, I actually was somewhat relieved with Maz Kanata's design herself and the way Maz Kanata was in that movie, because I was very nervous when I saw Maz on the poster. I was like, ooh, I don't know how this is going to be, but I thought she was actually good. Lupita Nyong'o gave a really good performance, and I thought the design of her, it was effective. It conveyed everything it needed to convey, and her interacting with the actual actors in her environment was for the most part fine, I think. But yeah, it's just,
well,
I guess the first act of that movie had so much momentum, and it just moved really, really, really quickly. Then, they meet up with Han Solo, they're chased, the Rathtars get loose, they leave. At that point, you kind of need to transition to what the rest of the movie is about. And so Maz Kanata's castle was basically the place where that happened. They're like, okay, this has been fun. Now we need to kind of get on with the story. We took a break when we were dealing with the Rathtars. Now we need to get on with the rest of the story. Here's a character who can help us do that for the two major characters, and even the three if you count Han and her talking about Leia. Right, here's one character who can help the rest of our characters kind of push them towards the rest of the movie, the rest of their story in this movie. So that, I think it was fine. I wasn't like amazed by the scene itself, but there were some interesting things in it, and there were some less than interesting things in it.
So here's a logistic thing question I've had. I haven't really investigated, but it always kind of irked me. So are we supposed to understand that Han didn't actually know where the Resistance was?
Yeah, that's my guess.
Okay, because it was just like the thing, like where he basically has, this droid is really important. It's got information where Luke is, and then he's like, but kind of the way they tell it, it's almost like, oh well, I'm not gonna go back there. She don't want to see me. I'll find you a way to get there or something. It's like, well, are things really that bad with your wife or ex-wife or whatever when it's really important?
He may have known. I don't know. There were several things in that movie that they just kind of glossed over, and in some cases, I think that was fine in the need for narrative clarity and narrative expediency and narrative efficiency. I think some of the things they glossed over were fine, and some of it was like, I needed a little more.
Yeah, it was just this idea that like somehow has Han Solo's morality backslid in the last 30 years? Is he like, I'm done with those Skywalker types? Because, he didn't really say that, because he was, he pretty much established that he knew Luke, and that there was something really sad about what happened there that he didn't really want to talk about. But I didn't ever think that he had like said like, fuck those guys, I'm not helping them. Yeah. And that was the kind of the weird imbalance of that scene, that was kind of like, I mean, I know it was that whole thing was kind of a means to an end, and an info dump, and in a sense to kind of maybe expand that universe a little bit, whereas we were seeing a lot of, I don't know, I guess they just thought, oh, we'll do a cantina scene. That actually falls in the realm of, oh, they're just remaking A New Hope, But
yeah. So I mean, I guess the other bit I would say is that knowing all that stuff, I guess to get back to the question, it was helpful knowing that, like, okay, you have the Republic and you have the Resistance and you have the First Order. Like, having J.J. Abrams kind of explain the relationship between those different political groups was helpful, because the movie did not do a good job of explaining those at all.
No.
And again, some of that was okay in the name of narrative efficiency, and some of it needed more, right? The Republic is gone now. Like, it was, the film wanted it to carry some emotional weight, or needed it to carry some emotional weight, and it just didn't. Because you're like, wait, what? The Republic's gone, but Leia is still, like, does that matter? Is that important? Like, it didn't imbue it with any real sense of importance, other than, here's an example of what Starkiller Base can do, and then in a minute we're gonna threaten our actual heroes with the same fate.
Yeah,
so just like keep this in the back of your mind that this is what they can do. But the fact that it was like, it could have been any planet,
and it was a weakness. I think it was a weakness in the narrative and the design choice, that I walked out of that theater convinced that that had been Coruscant.
Yeah, I did too.
And I had to
then
look.
They said the Hosnian system, and I was like, is Coruscant in the Hosnian system?
Yeah, I don't know my Star Wars cosmology off the top of my head. I don't sit around and think about it. And it's like, I would consider that to be, in some respects, another missed opportunity, in the fact that, people are already kind of writing these think pieces that somehow J.J. Abrams puts and Kasdan puts like a lot of fuck yous to Lucas in the movie, which I don't believe. Mm-hmm. I don't believe at all.
Yeah,
I think that's just, people doing it, which is fine. If you want to interpret it, that's fine. I don't agree.
Yeah. Well, I would say,
because I almost think he didn't blow up Coruscant because he didn't want to say fuck you to Lucas. You know what I mean? That's like, why not just say, if we're gonna reset this kind of idea, and like, well, hey, everything's up for grabs, why wasn't the planet on Coruscant? Why didn't they just destroy the planet and then have a real, aside from the the look of horror in Freema, I forget her name. I think she was on Doctor Who for a while. No, she wasn't on Doctor Who. I'm confused. I think she was on Torture. There's an actress who's in the one shot that I'm like, oh, I've seen her in a bunch of things and I can't remember what they are. But that horror in their face, and then realize you are losing the Jedi temples, the whole the holocrons exist anymore, all the stuff that happened, those things that's all gone. So it would have served two purposes. We also never have to go back and go there because we're moving in a different direction, so that we can just kind of close the door on. I think it might have actually served the story and made us feel in a real peril, in the sense that maybe he backed off because he felt like Lucas might take that personal and be like, oh, we're literally destroying the things that you created in attempts to reboot your thing that you sold Disney.
So I think I'm remembering in Aftermath, I think when the Republic starts back up, I think they might move the capital, or at least the Senate, to Chandrila, wherever Mon Mothma's from. And then on Twitter yesterday, I was reading through Pablo Hidalgo's Twitter feed, because it's pretty entertaining, actually, because people ask him all these ridiculous questions, and he just makes fun of Dash Rendar and stuff. He explained, someone asked him about it, and he explained that the Senate kind of moves around and meets on a rotating basis. So in the events of Aftermath or circa Aftermath, it's on Chandrila. But then at this point in time, they were meeting on Hosnian Prime. So it's not Coruscant. It's not even where the Senate is, immediately post Endor. It's whatever the Hosnian system,
which is hilarious.
And then the other bit is that the novelization apparently explains this a little more, and there's a conversation between Leia and that character played by the actress you mentioned, right? So the novel does spend a little more time developing that, okay, so there's the Republic and there's the Resistance, and this is sort of how they fit together, but the movie just doesn't do that. And so, to get back to what I was saying, so reading interviews with Abrams and other kind of leaks and things about the plot beforehand that explained that relationship, that was helpful, because the movie did not do a good job of that.
Yeah, I mean, you could even argue that A New Hope kind of muddies the waters of understanding when you're thrown in head first into the Star Wars universe in A New Hope, and all of a sudden Tarkin is talking about liquidating the Imperial Senate, and it's like, well, wait a second, wasn't she a senator?
Right.
And why are they liquidating us? And now the regional governors have direct control, right. But we have this battle station, and you're like, well, wait, I don't understand the bureaucracy of this thing. They keep talking about the Emperor. I thought emperors were supposed to be all powerful. It's like, why did they have a Senate in the first place? And then, of course, it gets explained, in the prequels. But then this kind of stuff is honestly, in some ways, it's almost that's the same muddiness of the political systems of fictional worlds that Lucas introduced in the prequels that people didn't like. Mm-hmm. It's like there could have been a much clearer thread through. I mean, the idea that there's this thematic idea where brought up several times where, Finn is called a traitor, and in the simple thing, he used to be a stormtrooper. And obviously this is a world where they do get to take their masks off because they knew who he was in his regular costume. With the jacket and stuff. And then later on, when Hux gives his Nuremberg rally speech, and he's in tears, and he's angry about this thing, and you're never. I mean, I know we're not supposed to sympathize, but we never quite understand. Kylo Ren refers to when he's interrogating Rey. like, you know, thieves and murderers and this kind of, this idea that it goes back to almost to that same kind of idea that's in a very simplistic fashion that comes up again in the prequels when you know, Obi-Wan and Anakin have that ridiculous conversation, like, in my view, the Republic are the bad guys. I mean, he literally just says that, and you're just like rolling your eyes. It's like they, you know, they only have 2 hours to do this, but I will say that they failed in providing us with a clear idea of how these things work and their motivations, almost in a perfect fashion, in the way that Lucas has always failed in providing us with this idea of, like, well, how does politics work? Maybe that's Star Wars. The political systems in Star Wars just don't work if they're ever examined. And also the idea that they switch these planets, to me it just kind of like it obscures the clear story, because, like, it's the same problem like I had with Prometheus, when, you know, they basically, all intents purposes, at the end of Prometheus, everything is set up, from the crashing spaceship to the to this, to that, and the other thing, that this is LV-426, the planet that Sigourney Weaver shows up in both Alien and Aliens, but then they explicitly go, no, this is LV-427, or, you know, they change it. Oh no, it's not supposed to be the same place. And I'm like, well, why isn't it just the same place? Right. Why do you have
to make it the same?
Just make it the same. Don't. And that's my feeling about this. Like, they should have just destroyed Coruscant. That way they could have sidestepped this whole idea that, like, well, when it all ends, is Luke going to be back on Coruscant and, you know, starting a Jedi Academy? And they could turn this whole idea that he's looking for the first Jedi Temple. And I mean, that's you know, I don't even consider that a minor nitpick. As being, it's one of the problems I have with that whole aspect of it. I mean, even so much, I don't care that. How come they can see the beam being shot across entire star systems? Like, I don't care about that. I don't mind that spaceships make noise in space. It doesn't bother me. I do like. I mean, I guess it's almost perfect. This movie is perfect in its poor logic, like every other Star Wars movies has really poor logic when it comes to these sort of things.
Yeah. So I have a related question to the previous one, but it's more targeted not necessarily at the leaks about this movie or, you know, the teasers, but the whole push, the marketing push of Journey to the Force Awakens. You know, Star Wars : Journey to the Force Awakens : and then, you know, Shattered Empire or Aftermath or you know, any of the other stuff. And I don't know how much of that you consumed, because the books I think I mostly. But you read some of them, but you know, not the books or some of the other stuff. What do you make of it? Like, was that just, how much of that was just like, okay, well, we need to publish these books. We're just gonna, and we have a movie coming out. We're just gonna tack Force Awakens on to get people interested in, or do you think that it actually, like, okay, no, this actually added something to the film?
It did nothing for me. Nothing. Yeah. Not a drop. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I kind of was like, I kind of expected it, because honestly, after getting into like 2 or 3 different either comic series or the Shattered Empire was the comic series with I didn't feel like I gained anything knowing that he was, except for the fact it might explain his attitude in the fact of his super positive kind of almost jingoistic idea of the Resistance, that he was born in it, he's indoctrinated in it, but it's kind of like, is that necessarily to be indoctrinated? Is that really that great of a do we really want to go, oh, he's Poe Dameron's really this way because basically no one's ever given him a choice. He makes this decision because he never thinks there's other options, or is it because he feels strongly about his cause? So in that way, it muddies it up, and it's not needed, and I didn't care, and it frustrated me because they had to dump the old EU to make the new movies make sense. Of course, it just irks me that it feels like they're basically, you know, basing these entire books on, you know, nothing. It's like, it'd be much better if they had like done like maybe like a Snoke book, but yeah, we shall see who Snoke is, or if he really is Snoke, or if he's, like other people are saying in think pieces, he's a character from the past, you know, brought back. I've heard everybody say that everything from that he's like, you know, the tortured soul of the Emperor to that, you know, that he's Darth Plagueis, and it's like, and I know that they're not going to do that. Yeah. Well, I don't know that they're not going to do that because it's all new now. But I hope that's not what. I hope they have something more interesting to do with it. And I just, yeah, I mean, I'm saying if you're out there listening to this and you're thinking, you're like, oh, I really enjoyed the movie and I want to extend that experience by getting into these comics, but I'm not sure. I would say no. You know, I'd say don't even waste your time. The tie-in video games and all that stuff. I mean, even to the point where they had the Jakku level on Battlefront, which I've played many times. It's, you know, you don't gain any greater understanding from anything from playing that or reading Shattered Empire or reading Aftermath. If anything, it builds you up to thinking that you're going to get a bigger payoff than you do even in the movie. Yeah, I think I would be a little more favorable, I think, than you are, just because I think, you know, okay, knowing who Poe Dameron's parents are and it's like, okay, so that explains why he's the most trusted pilot and why he's such a good pilot, because his mom was a great pilot, and you know, because we have, and we'll touch on these later, you know, like you said, the theories about who Snoke might be, or who Finn's parents might be, or who's Rey's parent, right? The backstories for a lot of these characters that we don't really get in this movie, knowing, like, at least, okay, so that's kind of Poe's backstory, and at least I think it's valuable because now at least that's not a thing people will talk about. Like, there's an answer to that, and I don't even think that, like, the answer itself is as important at this point than just like, all right, we need people to stop looking for these answers. So the fact that there are some answers, like, great, people stop looking for these answers. Aftermath, I think, was sort of helpful, just in knowing, not necessarily for this movie, but in setting up, you know, this post EU, like, okay, this is what the universe looks like post Endor now. Right, it's not the Truce of Bakura. It's not Courtship of Princess Leia, although they still haven't directly contradicted either of those books yet. Yeah. Not really. Sort of Truce of Bakura, but you know, it's just saying, like, okay, so this is kind of the lay of the land. So now when I go see this movie, the fact that there's this Republic and there's a First Order and there's a Resistance is like, all right, I can kind of see, like, where this comes from. That was helpful. But even then, you know, actually consuming those two bits of media, I don't think was as important as just, like, if someone had just told me. Right. I'd be like, oh, okay, great. Like, yeah, all you need is a line, you know, in the crawl, or just like, hey, by the way, here's a list of things you need to know before seeing this movie. And they're like, okay, great. I mean, I read that. I don't need to read Aftermath. I thought Aftermath was fine as a book, but I read Aftermath and I was still confused as to what the Resistance was. Right. Compared to the Republic. We're still 30 years post, or 30-ish years post Aftermath, so they're still building in a lot of, like, how you get from Aftermath to what's it called? This movie. Force Awakens. Thank you. Yeah. Right. So it's not going to be a direct connection, but, like, all right, I just have a general sense of, like, the way things are, the way they're setting things up, and that kind of helps me understand the rest of it. I just feel like they just in the book sense and in the extended media sense that they they dribbled out just the very least they could get away with and still put Star Wars on the name of the thing, because they're all just waiting for bigger payoffs down the thing. It's like, well, I want to hear this story about Han Solo and Chewbacca helping in the liberation of Kashyyyk. I don't want, that kind of thing. It's like they could have told that story and not, tip their heads that that eventually Han and Chewbacca lose the Falcon, or that Leia and him get married and have a kid. They could have done that stuff all, that they could have explored it without tipping the idea that things aren't necessarily what we thought they were going to be. So I just think it's like, like and I've said this a bunch of times. It's like, generally I don't want a bunch of stories about characters that aren't in the movies. It's never been. I mean, occasionally I've enjoyed. I enjoyed those Timothy Zahn books, but he did such a good job of integrating those characters in with our favorites.
Yeah,
that it felt natural, and he created a great villain that we actually cared about, and of course, and it was all. And that at the time, we also knew that we thought that's all we would be getting. We didn't think there was going to be prequels, sequels, squeakles, or any of that stuff.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So to move on to the next question, then. Right. Well, that was a little, not quite as big picture, but we'll go back to some of the big picture questions. Where do you rank for The Force Awakens among all of the Star Wars movies?
4th.
Okay. So I'll ask you this as a secondary question. Does it even belong on the same scale as the others? Like, how easy, when you think about ranking this, you had a pretty quick answer, so either you thought about this or it's not that hard of a question. But
I've been thinking about it.
Wait, so you've been thinking about it. I mean, how easy was it for you to do that? To say, like, okay, this is clearly 4th.
Well, it really solidified in my mind that when I go and I watch Star Wars, that really my number one concern is what's going on with Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie, et al. That's the original wheelhouse. Now, that being said, I have over the years have grown more fond of the prequels. I'm almost what you would say kind of a prequel apologist. But, Star Wars to me is, those first 3 movies, and it's that kind of high adventure, kind of with a lot of humor in it, humor that works rather than a lot of, and to me, it's like more and more you go back and it's almost like the prequels it's like, a science fiction version of I, Claudius. It's so dry, there's beautiful, designs and stuff like that, but a lot of the action feels stilted and almost unrealistic. So anything that kind of gives me more of what I first began to love about it, to me it ranks higher. I mean there is a line of demarcation. It's like I think I'll I was quick to answer, but I think in some ways maybe there'll be a time that I will go, well, there's Lucas Star Wars and then there's Disney Star Wars, and then never the twain shall meet kind of thing. But right now, it's the new thing. It gave me a lot of what I wanted, a little bit of what I didn't want, but more what I wanted. It gave it, and it felt more like Star Wars, the Star Wars that I grew up with more than the prequels ever did. So it's like I'm giving up an expansive story for the feeling of familiarity. I mean, and I know that that's kind of like, well, wait a second, how can you like both the same way? But it's like I feel like it's the freshness of it. I mean, but also even with all the things I love about this new movie, I will never say that like, oh, it's better than the original. None of it's better than the original 3, even with the Ewoks and stuff. And I mean, I'm not saying I like Ewoks that much, but that's a complete story, a rise and the rise of the rebels against the Empire, a farm boy who stands into his destiny, and I don't know. I'm not articulating this properly. I think it's just one of those things where I'll have to constantly reassess because it's just so new and it was so exciting. I can't help but rank it higher than the prequels for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the reason I asked my secondary question is I'm having a hard time ranking it. I'm having a hard time even ranking it with the prequels, just because it's different, right? And it's different in a couple of ways. But the biggest one is that, what we were talking about earlier is that it is so reflective of the original trilogy. And it's almost like its aims as a movie are different, right? It's a Star Wars movie, but it's a Star Wars movie that is trying to, in a lot of ways, like you said, give you that kind of feeling of familiarity, give you that comforting feeling, giving you that, like, oh, remember, remember how you felt when you saw the original trilogy for the first time, and a lot of the marketing has been geared towards that. And that's where I think, to the extent that people think Abrams is, giving the finger to George Lucas, I don't think that's true at all. But, all of his insistence on like practical effects and, we needed to step back to move forward, and we wanted to, use that structure of the original trilogy and, all that kind of stuff. I think, given that Lucas absolutely would not want to do that, then it's in kind of either a back door or like passive aggressive way. It is kind of like, yeah, well, George, you're not in charge anymore, so we're going to do this, and we're going to do it the way that we think should be done, which is not the way that you did the most recent Star Wars movies, right? We're gonna change the way we did them because we didn't think you did them well. That's kind of the implication, right? Even if it's not directly out there. But, so thinking about that, and as you say, anything that comes without George Lucas attached to it is essentially going to be fan fiction.
Yes.
So thinking of it in those terms, or thinking of it as like, hey, we want to make a movie that reminds you of these other movies, it's then hard for me to decide, like, okay, well, do I like this movie better than I like Return of the Jedi? Because this movie is trying to emulate Return of the Jedi in some places. And so I think I'm going to, at least right now, and the other part of it that makes it tough is because I'm not, 10, 12 years old anymore. That feeling, as much as I enjoyed this movie and as much as I still really enjoy Star Wars, right, the feelings are different. And they're wrapped up as much in nostalgia as they are for that kind of like first blush response, like that kind of fresh excitement of like, oh wow, there's all this Star Wars stuff I can read. And so it's hard for me to then say like, okay, well, do I like this better or worse than Jedi, better or worse than A New Hope, or better, certainly I liked it better than I liked the prequels, but even then, the best of the prequels, I think everyone agrees, is Revenge of the Sith. And even then, as many echoes of the original trilogy as Lucas put in the prequels, the aims, again, were different. And so for me, it's hard to say, to even rank them kind of on the same scale, or, they're trying to do different things. And certainly you can evaluate different art and different whatever, books, articles, music, whatever, that are trying to do for different things and saying, okay, well, this thing was more successful at what it was trying to do than that thing was successful at what that thing was trying to do. But it's still, you can rank them, you can evaluate things against one another. But at least at this point in time, I'm having a hard time doing that with this movie.
Yeah, I think that's always a problem when you rank stuff. I think I had the answers already because I think I knew you were going to ask, because a lot of people have asked.
Right.
And it's it's kind of like, well, there's a total experience that that you get when you kind of, experience these movies over and over. And yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm an adult, and then it's a lot of it's nostalgia. And 2015, it's like the two biggest movies in my mind of things that I enjoyed were, you know, The Force Awakens and Mad Max. And geez, I mean, that's totally nostalgia. Either it's the same guy coming back and making something with a different person, or it's a different guy making going back with the old people. You know, it's kind of this yeah, I'm very pardon me, steeped in this nostalgia. But I mean, you could make an argument that Star Wars is constantly diminished from every time, the minute he tried to recreate it in Empire. The idea that A New Hope, or just Star Wars, is truly the only pure expression of this idea of the hero's journey that he came out with. And it's like a lot of it was just like, then he created that movie, and he did it under almost duress and financial constraint. He didn't know if it was going to work. It was going to be a TV movie of the week, and then he got it, and then he was surprised, and it was like this huge thing. And really, he's never really truly improved on that first movie, in the fact that it's the perfect distillation of the stories that humanity has been telling each other since they learned how to write stuff down or to tell stories. And the idea of, like, he just caught the zeitgeist. You know, it's the serials done in modern terms, which is hilarious now, because now, you know, he was in the 70s making something that was popular in the 30s, and now we're in the 10s trying to emulate something that was made in the 70s. And it's like, in that sense, you know, Abrams failed, you know, but even Lucas failed trying to recreate that. And it's like, his sequel was dark, and it was gritty, and it expanded on the story, but it also diluted it. It confused it. All of a sudden, it's not, you know, it's mystical. It taps into, like, Eastern philosophies and things that you have to sit there and think of, rather than, you know, Star Wars. You could just, what is the Force? It's a thing that goes around all of us, and it controls everything, and that's all you really need to know. And oh, here's a sword, and, you know, you can strap that to your belt, and someday you'll learn how to use it. And, you know, and it's that kind of, you know, it's creatively, it's like, in some respects, he kind of shot his wad in the first movie, and he spent five other times trying to recreate that idea. And now we're on this, you know, it's the 7th movie, and a guy who was 11 when the first one came out is trying to, who is basically effectively his entire creative existence was probably formed between that and, like, you know, his, you know, JJ's pivotal movies that, you know, I don't know what they are. I mean, I know he's a huge Phantasm fan, but in some ways Phantasm was influenced by Star Wars. So really it all goes back to Star Wars. You know, I think maybe he realized that it was far too daunting to try to recapture that. That's why it's like he seems to have cherry-picked a lot of the great concepts from the first 3 movies, and nothing from the prequels 3, except for
I mean, I thought it was interesting that I didn't see hardly anything that reminded me of the prequels. The music is a little different, because I have the soundtrack that I've been listening to, and I hear things in the soundtrack that remind me a little bit of the prequels, but visually there's really not a lot to connect episode 1 to episode 7. Right. Which is, J.J. Abrams said before this came out, episode 7 comes after episode 6, so it's going to be more like Return of the Jedi. Yeah,
and I mean, he's great pains to say that he would never do anything to retcon or whatever, or to pretend that the prequels didn't exist. But
so then the next question, related question. Where would you place this movie among J.J. Abrams movies? Where does this movie, you know, not that we're just going to rank everything, but where would this movie fit within his oeuvre?
Boy, you know,
And I'll say that I before you answer, I should preface this by saying I think I've only seen one other J.J. Abrams movie, and that was the first Star Trek movie. So this is at least partially me asking you, who has seen more of his movies, because I'm genuinely curious. Like, so where does this movie stack up against his others?
Well, it's kind of the interesting thing where I think I've said many times before, I've never been a huge fan of his directing.
Right.
I honestly, I really, Super 8 left me cold. I thought it was a ridiculous pastiche of harebrained Robert Zemeckis and Joe Dante and Spielberg that kind of doesn't work. I absolutely hated the story of Star Trek Into Darkness. I'm trying to think of the other one. It's like he did
Mission Impossible 3 was his first.
I like that. I like
one.
that one. There was a lot of. It's a good pot boiler action film. I mean, if I'm being honest, this is his best film only because he has finally achieved the thing that he's kind of good at, which is kind of dipping into the great well of, late 70s and 80s adventure and being able to synthesize that. I mean, I feel mean. I don't even know why I feel mean saying this, because maybe because watching all these interviews in the last 2 weeks or something has kind of warmed me up to him as a person. I watched him do.
He seems, by all accounts, he seems like
he
a nice
seems like
guy.
the kind of guy that I would actually like. He's probably not a dick.
Yeah,
and that to me, that in people in general, them not being a dick that can be a tall order, because usually, having money and access and people telling you you're great kind of sometimes gives people free rein to be kind of a dick. And and I could go on for hours talking about what my definition of somebody who's a dick is, but I won't. But yeah, I mean, I think this is his crowning achievement as a movie maker. Now, he's made a lot of TV shows, and I haven't seen them all. But I think this is what his career has been working up to. Now, what he does with that he's achieved his goals, and he moves on and makes his next film. I mean, I'm really curious just to see what he does, because he has to make a decision. It's like, am I going to be an alchemist, or am I going to be a visionary? And it's like, he's done 6 movies now, and the 7th one, I will say this hands down, I am glad that he is not the making another Star Wars movie. And I know he's already said, like, publicly,
he wishes that he hadn't turned down Episode 8 or whatever.
But I honestly think that once the smoke clears, I think he'll realize that why tempt fate? Why tempt fate? Why not let another person kind of, if this is what we are now, is the idea of this line of demarcation that no, we are in the post-Lucas era Star Wars. Why create another Lucas? Why create someone who is, because really, people go, oh well, he just opened up the book and kind of looked at what Lucas did and copied that. And it's like, well, he did and he didn't. I mean, look what happens when you're too reverent. Look at the big clusterfuck that was Superman Returns with Bryan Singer, who just, if you ever watch the behind the scenes, is just like Richard Donner, who's not dead, but and also hasn't made a really great movie in a long time.
Yeah,
it's like you were just, and he was so adherent to something that was made in 1979 that he was fired off the second one, so he never really, he never made that second Superman movie. So it's like, yeah, you can go out and buy this goofy, fan edit thing that Warner Brothers sells called the Richard Donner cut, and and it's not very good, no matter what people say. I think I don't think there's anybody else out there that could have done what J.J. Abrams did with this movie, because he he seemed to intimately know it. He's already done, he obviously has studied Lucas. He studied Spielberg. He's friends with these people. I mean, he technically brought a lot of great things to it that Star Wars has never had, like great camera movement. It just made me realize how static some of the camera shots in the original trilogy could be.
Yep.
He got you in there, and he took something that should be considered very old and very pat. And that in 2015 we should know exactly what a Star Wars movie is going to give us. And he gave us something. He did, I will still say he took chances. He took some chances by having, in his casting, by casting some, unknowns. I don't consider it taking a chance casting a woman as a lead. In 2015, that's not a chance. 2000. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, we had a woman be the kind of the focus of this movie. That's not taking a chance. That's just smart.
Yeah.
That's just seeing, that's where films are at. Hey, we've had Hunger Games and stuff. And also she's really good in it. I mean, that's the thing.
She is. She's very good.
In Boyega, hearing about the 7 months that he auditioned for that movie. And we know that, Jesse Plemons was up for this role, and I don't know who else was. There was a lot of people up for this role that were...
Sure.
And then even for Rey, it was... I forget the girl's name. She's Irish. It's like... She was in Hannah, and...
I don't know.
Yeah, she was also in...
Saoirse Ronan?
Yeah, and she admitted that she kind of blew it by talking about it.
Yeah.
Before, early in the process, somebody let it slip. Oh, I'm testing for this. And she basically admitted that cost me the role.
Yeah.
And I think that's good because she's already been in these kind of movies. The Stephanie Meyer movie, that's the lady that did Twilight. They did what's it called? The Host. She was the star of that. And she was good in that, which it's a terrible movie. But, the cat, like I said, he brought in... He was basically dealing with a legacy cast, which could be good, if Harrison Ford is, getting paid $20 million to make this movie, and he goes, I want to, somebody pointed out that, Harrison Ford doesn't really get into the Indiana Jones character in the Crystal Skull movie, and that's part of its problem. And that the big difference is that there was something in the text of this movie that allowed Harrison Ford to become Han Solo again. I never once said, oh, that's Harrison Ford up there, where in the Crystal Skull, it's like, oh, Harrison Ford's doing he's doing an impersonation of a character he hasn't played since 1989. No, I really felt like he got in there. And J.J. Abrams got something out of these people that...
Yeah, I will say, with regard to Harrison Ford, I thought he was super growly. And one of the things that we know J.J. Abrams said about directing Harrison Ford is, he told Harrison Ford, don't be growly. I don't want growly Han Solo. I want, vigorous... I don't know what the opposite of growly would be.
Right.
And I thought he came off as very, very, very growly.
Oh.
To me. Now, so we have a different opinion on that. That's right. Perfectly fine. I mean, but I will say, so there's a interview. It's basically Lawrence Kasdan interviewing J.J. Abrams at the Directors Guild of America. They did a screening of The Force Awakens, I think a day or two before it was officially released, and so this was affiliated with that. It's not that much of an interview because he only asked a couple of questions, and J.J. Abrams just kind of goes and goes and goes.
I've seen it,
and you've seen it, and I think before it was released, I think a lot of the big quotes have already been picked out of it. J.J. Abrams talking about how it was important to have a movie that women could go take their daughters to and everything like that. But one of the interesting things I thought in that when thinking about Abrams and as a director of this movie is how he would they would do a bunch of takes. They would do, 10 or 12 or 15 takes of something. And then he would get in the editing room and realize the first take was the best take. And, watching each successive take and how Abrams is basically coaching, I think it's, he refers to her, so I'm assuming it's either Daisy Ridley or Carrie Fisher. I'd guess Daisy Ridley. With each successive take, coaching her to get worse and worse and worse and give a worse performance and saying like, no, you need to give more and more. And, so the performance gets bigger or whatever. Whereas the first take, it was like, no, she got it. She nailed it. And so, right, his ability to see that, I think, speaks highly of him. But, hearing that story doesn't necessarily paint him in the best picture as a director. That, there in the moment, he doesn't realize, like, no, that was great. Let's move on. Right. That he's working with this actor and, like, getting them to give worse and worse performances as they go on. And so that's one thing that kind of makes me wonder, all right, how much of this movie succeeded because it was J.J. Abrams directing, and how much of it was just, I think J.J. Abrams, I think this is probably also his best movie. I think I agree with you there. Again, I've only seen one other movie, but at least to me, it was certainly more memorable than the first Star Trek movie was. Sorry. And just hearing other people talk about, and reading reviews of his other films, and talking to you about it, I had sort of the same read on this film where, this is a pastiche, but it's like, and that's kind of what he does, but this is the best he's done at that. This is like his best effort at what he does. So I think, having him on probably mattered in terms of quality and setting the tone and sort of establishing a lot of the big picture decisions and, being the one who makes the call on like designs and art and shots and, directing ILM to like, no, you should have the X-Wing move this way across the screen or whatever. I'm sure all of that was good. And I think you're right that he definitely freed up the camera a lot more than Lucas would have. But in terms of the acting and the performances, I'm sure he helped, but I'm going to wonder, okay, how much of now that I've heard him talk about that, I'm going to wonder like, okay, so how much of the acting was him working with the actors to get these performances and him coaxing these performances out of the actors, and how much of this was just like, they got good actors in this movie and they just kind of did their thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like you get that idea that, he cast a type in, I'm talking about Lucas again, he cast a type in A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
He realizes he's out of his depth with actors, so he hires a director that actually interacts with the actors. He gets a good performance out of them Empire. Mm-hmm. Then he gets Marquand, and it kind of backslides a little bit.
Right. I think with Marquand, he was like, okay, this guy does documentaries that fits my own kind of documentary style. Right. He went back to less about working with the actors and more about the visual piece of it, I think.
And then he did his prequels, and then he completely discounted. I don't even know.
All of it was out the window.
Yeah, I don't even know if he made good. Either he cast the wrong people, or he cast people that were good in other things, but maybe not necessarily good in a Star Wars, or he cast people that were young and impressionable that didn't want to.
I mean, I think there are good actors in the prequels, but I don't think anyone would say that the prequels are those people's best performances.
Right. It's like, ugh. I just think of Natalie. I was watching Attack of the Clones, and Natalie Portman is so bad in that. And
she's fine in The Phantom Menace. She's fine in Phantom Menace, but then as it gets on, it's just like, ugh.
She gets worse and worse and worse. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of her. I mean, she's really great and natural in like Leon the Professional, so it is kind of weird that she's so stilted in these. Like, somehow it is one of these situations where it's like he's encouraging actors to be more stilted in their thing. But I mean, I assume that the whole faster, more intense rule still applied to the prequels, and that was like, it was all about lighting and we'll add the performances in later. And it's like, what?
Yeah. Well, so this leads to my next question, because J.J. Abrams is not working on, he's a producer on
Episode 8.
Episode 8, but he's not directing it.
Right.
How did this movie make you feel? How do you feel about the upcoming movies? Are you excited? Are you nervous? Are you relieved? Do you feel like, okay, these are going to be good? Because, I mean, another thing that's been coming out, because people are already talking about these movies, and I think this even happened before Episode 7 came out, was Lawrence Kasdan was talking about it, because, I'm friends with Rian Johnson, and I've seen the script or whatever, and he called it like some crazy thing, and it's going to be completely different. He was like, it's going to be good, but it's going to be completely different, right? And so how do you feel, now that you've seen this movie, how do you feel about the upcoming Star Wars movies?
I'm excited about 8, and I would say that 9 is a wild card for me, because I don't know where they're going to take it, and I'm not necessarily filled with excitement all over Colin Trevorrow. I mean, safety not guaranteed. I liked it okay.
Yeah,
and I really didn't care for Jurassic World. I thought that thing was a heap of shit. And it's like, well, that's a huge franchise that has been dormant for 10 plus years. It just, I mean, I don't know if Star Wars is going to be a repository of visionary ideas, and maybe Rian Johnson might be the last guy that seems to take chances with his work. I mean, Brick is fantastic in the fact that it takes pretty bold choices. I would say that I didn't enjoy Looper on the first watching, where I've actually I enjoy it more. I don't think it's superb or anything like that. But a lot of that is acting choices that Joseph Gordon-Levitt tries too hard to be young Bruce Willis in that movie, and it casts this weird pallor over it. And it's also a shtick. I'm hoping, every indicator shows that, Rian Johnson has a really great sense of cinema. He appreciates film, and he loves movies. And I always think that in the sense, film and movies are two different things. I mean, his partner or whatever is like, she has that podcast, where they examine Hollywood, and so he's obviously a person who's aware. He's just not some he's not like some hot shit guy who's just like, let's make it faster and crazier, and let's just goose it. And, I think he already has a sense of like, I'm participating in something that's bigger than me, and I have to concede to that, but I also have to make it exciting. Otherwise, it's easy to take something that people love and turn it into something like, well, he really fucked that up kind of idea. So I'm excited about him, and also the fact that after about 2 or 3 days I realized that we're only going to be waiting 18 months for this. Whereas I thought, 2 years, 2 years to hear the next word out of Luke's mouth, and somebody goes, now it's 18 months, and I'm like, holy shit, it is. It's only 18 months that they're this kind. I'm excited. I mean, I left the theater obviously more excited for the future of Star Wars than I even did for the Phantom Menace, when there was a little bit of like, well, I know they have to do that to tell the story. It's the beginning, but everything will be fixed in the sequel, And I don't feel like Rian Johnson has a lot to fix. Isn't a lot. He doesn't have to apologize for anything. He doesn't have to. I mean, I think the main concern that a lot of people I keep hammering on other podcasts and review shows, is that they always feel like, oh, well, we need a better explanation for the death of Han Solo. Like, we felt that was cheap. That was almost for nothing. And I don't believe that at all. I think that was perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect for a character who actually, as time went on, became less and less important to the grand story.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wonderful tribute to the idea of him making a sacrifice,
right?
You know, like there's so much telling once he shows up and he says to Leia, "I saw him. I saw her, our son," and he kind of kicks himself about what happened, and then she goes, he knows what he has to do. He knows, I have to go. Like, yeah, okay, I have to help blow this thing up, but deep down, I think he knew that I have to confront my son,
right?
In the same way that Luke had to confront Vader. But Luke was full of this, thing. I will say one little caveat. The idea that you could almost make a case that Leia basically sent her ex-husband to his death.
Mm-hmm.
In this weird way.
Right.
Like this, she keeps hammering this idea that only you're the only one who can convince him.
Right. If you see our son, bring him home. Meaning he has to go talk to him.
And then when he's trying to convince him, he never plays to the idea that you have a mother and your mother misses you, which is like to me is a little weird.
Well, and even in when in the rest of the movie, Kylo Ren only ever talks about his disdain for Han Solo. He never mentions his mother at all.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, and I'm wondering.
Well, I mean, what was that comment? Abrams or whomever before that it was released. Star Wars is about fathers and sons, right? I mean, it would be nice if that changed, but
it's Well, the one thing that they did, the one thing that J.J. Abrams was able to successfully bring over from the Lucas era of Star Wars, I would call it, is that they all have a blind spot on sexuality and in grown up relationships. It's like it's the nobody's even married in any of these movies. You know what I mean? It's like
that we know of.
Yeah, it's that kind of goofy thing where it's like, yeah, well, it's been 40 years, but boys still can't really talk about
their feelings.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say I'm sort of like you. I'm hopeful that Episode 8, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hopeful that is where we get a lot of that new stuff that we haven't seen before in Star Wars, and that it's kind of infused with this new energy now. Rogue One, I'm still really skeptical of this idea of like a gritty Black Hawk Down style war movie set in the Star Wars universe. But at the same time, like, I still love that cast photo so much that I'm like, oh, this might look really, really good.
Did you see that thing with Phil Tippett and the Wookiee costume?
No.
So you can look around on Phil Tippett, he was a model maker, and I don't think I think he was only involved in the first 3. He did not. Yeah. Or he left after 2 and was hired as a contractor for the 3rd. He did the
Rancor.
Played the Rancor, like the early version of the Rancor. He kind of stayed more in the old school realm. He was brought back to recreate the chess scene, the chess board. It's a shot of him with a Wookiee that's obviously not Chewbacca.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different hair pattern. It's way better looking than the Wookiees in Episode 3, which I watched again recently and actually was really taken aback about how poor they look in comparison to the original trilogy and The Force Awakens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Episode 9, I'm sort of like you. We'll see. And then the Han Solo movie, again, who knows?
Yeah, that's a wild card. I mean, I think they're going to take some real chances. They keep on hammering about how funny it's going to be, and I think that's a super important movie on casting.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm still kind of holding out for Nicholas Hoult will play him. Nicholas Hoult plays Beast in some of the new X-Men movies. He also played the one of the guys in the Mad Max movie. That he's the guy that ends up on the truck with
the War Boy.
Yeah, War Boy. And I really like. I think he's got the right face for it. I think he could pull it off. I think if they keep that age, they don't make him too close in age to Harrison Ford in the first one, I think they can pull it off. I'm willing to take a chance with it, because if it blows, it doesn't kind of screw up the saga, and I can kind of dismiss it if I don't like it. I mean, part of me feels like, do we need to know to know every aspect of this story?
Right.
I mean, there's still this Boba Fett film. I haven't heard jack about it.
Yeah.
It almost makes me wonder if it's like some kind of thing where they're going to come and announce that, like, oh, we were never doing a Boba Fett film. It's going to be an Obi-Wan film, and we signed Ewan McGregor, and he's coming back, and we were just trying to counter.
There's a code. Yeah, I mean, the one I guess in my head, kind of saving grace, the one thing that makes me think the Han Solo movie won't be bad is the fact that Kasdan is co-writing it. And the one thing that worries me about all of the other movies, including Episode 8, is that we really don't have a lot of evidence that anyone other than Lawrence Kasdan knows how to write a Star Wars movie. In terms of the dialogue and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
Moving the plot along, because you've mentioned a couple of times, you're talking about the humor and the humor works and it's not crazy. I mean, the humor in this movie, it's almost entirely in the dialogue, which is kind of where it should be. Yeah. Without having these kind of slapsticky moments that detract from everything else.
Yeah, it's kind of
and so even with Episode 8, as much as I think it might be good, we really don't have any evidence that someone besides Lawrence Kasdan knows how to write a Star Wars movie so that it actually works. And that's what I'm worried about with the rest.
That's true.
And then the other bit is, since I've been listening to the soundtrack, we really don't have any evidence we have zero evidence that anyone other than John Williams knows how to write the music for a Star Wars movie. And so that's honestly, even more than the kind of gritty realism of it or whatever, the fact that he's not writing the music for that movie is what worries me the most about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's
I'm kind of I'm waiting, all right, so are you going to announce that he's doing Episode 8, or let's hurry up? I'm getting nervous about this.
Yeah, and I definitely want to do just a show dedicated to the soundtrack in the future, because it's I don't even want to go down that road right now, because I need to sit down and listen to it a few more times before I formulate my opinion.
Yeah,
I have my first blush response that I'm not really ready to talk about. But as far as that kind of stuff, did you think there was too many references to the other films, like the Kessel Run and just
I think it was okay.
The remote, being thrown out of the junk box, the masks from Empire,
I thought some of that was fine. Musically, I thought there were maybe too many references to the Rebel fanfare, even maybe where they didn't necessarily fit. When they see the Falcon, I guess it's it's associated with the Rebellion, and it's certainly associated with the original trilogy, but I don't think the Rebel fanfare is the most appropriate cue, I think, or that's not the first thing that comes to mind when I think of the Falcon in the first three movies. Those kind of references, I thought they were fine. I kind of expected them. Some of them were a little more jarring than others, but on the whole, I thought they were fine. But that's also what I was saying about earlier. That's a little bit why I have a hard time comparing it to those other movies where it's all right, well, you're referencing this thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to then compare it to the thing itself.
Yeah, that is kind of...
All right. So, in the interest of moving us along,
Okay.
The last question I have for you, we're going to have a pitch session.
Oh, pitch session.
Everyone's talking about it. The streets
boy.
are talking about it. Who are Rey's parents? There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of theories. Could be Luke, could be Obi-Wan, could be Darth Plagueis. I don't know.
I want you to go first on this.
All right. I have an idea that struck me while the second time I was watching it. The idea is that Rey is the daughter of Wedge Antilles. How about that? Right? Because everyone's trying to use her parentage to explain like the fact that she can use the Force, but her parents don't have to be, big in the Force. That was never part of the idea. She's a good pilot. Maybe that's where she got it. When she's on Jakku, she has a little, she knitted a little, not voodoo doll, but like a little doll that kind of looks like, a rebellion pilot with the orange jumpsuit and the white stuff. So maybe that's like a memento of her father that she keeps. The idea that it's Luke, I don't think makes any sense, because in the flashback she's clearly old enough when she got left on Jakku. She's clearly old enough to have known who her parents are. Right. And okay, so maybe she was raised by her mother alone. Fine. But I think that's less likely, and it's also the least interesting answer to me. Right. So Wedge Antilles is her father, but you ask, how does that explain her accent? She has a British accent. Well, so how about this? So her father is Wedge Antilles. Her mother is Mon Mothma. I am positing to you here that Rey is the love child, the wartime love child of Wedge Antilles and Mon Mothma. That she was sent to Jakku after the Battle of Jakku. We don't know what happens after the Battle of Jakku. It's sort of intimated in Aftermath and in Lost Stars that was kind of the end of the fight between the Empire and the Rebellion, or at least towards the end, that the Republic kind of reestablished itself soon after that. Mon Mothma, she's the new leader. She's the leader of this new republic. She doesn't have time for a kid. She can't let anyone know that she has this child out of wedlock with one of the heroes of the rebellion.
Yeah, why?
And so Rey is sent to Jakku. What do you think?
You raise some interesting. Why does Star Wars have that issue about getting pregnant being so shameful? Like that whole thing, like when they find out that I'm, Padme says that when they find out I'm pregnant, I won't be allowed to continue being a senator. And if they find out you're the father, you won't be able to be a Jedi. I mean, it makes a good case that there's something in this galaxy that's really hung up about, having kids out of wedlock or something. It's this, or having kids, people in certain power positions wanting to have a child or something like that. So, I will actually say I kind of get the feeling you're joking.
Well, so the Wedge thing was actually a thought that occurred to me, and then I was like, all right, so how do I explain the British accent? And I thought of the Mon Mothma thing, and I decided to put them together, and that's the joke. But, yes.
Accents aren't genetic, but yeah.
Let me explain the joke. Yeah. So how about you? What's your idea?
Well, I'll go a little bit more out fourth wall. I will say that my feeling is that Rey, that we the fans are the parents of Rey, and that they have no idea who her parents are, and they're probably banging heads in a conference room.
Yeah. No, I don't think they wrote this movie with any intention of her parents being anyone in particular. They set it up this way, and then are like, all right, we'll figure it out later.
I will say this: the minute you said the word pitch session, I got a dull shock of horror to realize that we agreed to do this, and everybody in my house is sick right now. So I've been playing nursemaid to people, and I forgot to do my homework.
No, that's all right. Don't worry about it. But no, I mean, I think
I will say
I think
that
you're right. I think they wrote it this way with no real person in mind as her parents, and we're like, okay, we'll figure this out later. We'll explain it later.
Yes. Well, yes. And I mean, I think it's your guess is as good as any. I will say, really, Peter Soretta from Slash Film, he really says he feels that Rey was a student at this Jedi Academy who was probably, maybe it was a large Jedi Academy to the point where Kylo Ren or Ben Solo did not either recognize her, but even though she never changed
and that she thought Luke Skywalker was a myth.
Yeah. Well, there's all that thing where they make people forget and stuff. I mean, we could go on, but the problem is that we need to wrap this up. And I will say that this is, we're 2.5 hours into this, and I feel like we just scratched the surface of the things that we could talk about this film. That being said, we are going to be taking another week off because we have prior commitments that were made before this movie came out. Mm-hmm. So we are going to give you this 2.5 hour show to ruminate on, and either get annoyed with us or agree with us fully. Yeah. And in that time, you can send us mail at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com.
That's right. We posed a lot of questions on this here episode. What are your answers to our questions?
Exactly. Email is great. If you're good at brevity, you can tweet us at talkingbirdcast on the Twitter. Not really using the Facebook page. The Tumblr is kind of for later stuff. When the home video comes out in April, we can screen cap stuff and talk more about the design. We haven't even talked about the art books. Haven't talked about the soundtrack, the visual guides, all that stuff. Like I said, we needed to come out and kind of throw the opening salvo, which will be one of many conversations about this movie. Hey, my opinion might even change because I want to go see it again because it's been 2 weeks almost since I've seen it. I feel like I need to go see it again. So I think we're going to wrap up there for the week. For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I'm John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force...
Well, The
Force, or maybe we should change it to, where's my boyfriend? I like that Wookiee.
I like that Wookiee.
All right. Have a good week. Have a good 2016. We'll see you soon.
Yep.